with the big-time trillion-dollar business of sports, sometime the highest visible $45 million a year Roger Goodell's of the world. We have someone who has been in his post twice as long, we'll get into that, and frankly, near the Mount Rushmore of hockey commissioners. If Gary Bettman is on the center, maybe we'll say Dave Andrews, who's been the commissioner of the American Hockey League for 23 years, but who's counting? That's on Mount Rushmore, man, I got to tell you. And a good friend for a long time. How are you?
Great.
Thank you for doing this. Really appreciate it. You know, we've had discussions with all of the leaders in the industries, and we just had Pat O'Connor on, minor league baseball guy who's been in his position, and to the description of what's it like to run an organization which has all of the issues of a major league, but not maybe the visibility. And he said herding cats. Is it herding cats?
Yeah, well, it was originally, I think. I think over time, you're not herding as many cats once you gain a certain amount of trust from your ownership group and other stakeholders. For us, those stakeholders are everyone from the NHL to our Players Association to our officials to all the people that you work with on a regular basis. And if you haven't built that kind of trust with them, then yeah, herding cats is a pretty good description of what you'd be facing.
What are the biggest changes in the American Hockey League, or let's say your job, in the last 23 years?
Well, the biggest changes in the league have been our footprint, and we've expanded the league from 14 when I started, and a league that had not great investment in terms of our ownership quality, and we weren't in very great markets, and our relationship with the NHL was significantly different than it is today. So the biggest change has been our footprint. We have 30 teams now, and we're stretching from Newfoundland in the east to California in the west and up to Manitoba in the north and down to San Antonio and Austin in Texas. So we've got a very large footprint. I think our other big change is that when we merged the International Hockey League into the American Hockey League back in 2001, we really created one league at the AAA level, if you will, of hockey. Kind of eliminated our competition and established ourselves one-to-one with the NHL. So we have 30 teams, they have 30, going to be 31 in a year. And we are joined at the hip in terms of our player development role for the National Hockey League. So that's been a big change over time, and obviously a positive change.
And really an unprecedented development when you consider the evolution of Major League sports, because there's always the discussion about a second-level league or a second league. Where did they fit? USFL, WWFL, way back when. And the ones that are successful are the ones that understand how to work harmoniously. Now, hockey's no different. There was the WHA, but this is so much different than any of that I guess you could argue that stability does rule the day today.
Well, it does, and it's partially because of the relationship that we built with the National Hockey League and understanding who we are and what role we can play for the NHL and what role the NHL can play for us. And so consequently, I think we both see the value in the relationship between the two leagues to the point now where we are approaching a fairly significant level of ownership in our league from the NHL itself, from NHL teams. So that's changed. That's the other thing that's changed quite a bit in the last 5 years. We're now at 18 of 30 teams that are NHL owned, which is really a change in that sort of pattern between independent ownership and NHL ownership. And I think it's good in some ways, and then it's challenging in other ways.
But they're good and challenging. I think we all understand as business people what the good and the challenging are. But if you can identify those issues beforehand, you can certainly get a jump on the problem, as it were.
Absolutely, and I think it's not really completely tied to the NHL versus independent owner issue, but there are situations where the interests of the independent owner are different from the interests of the NHL owner, and it's my responsibility to have both of those ownership groups understand each other's positions and find a happy medium in terms of, like, scheduling would be a great example where NHL teams are not really looking, NHL-owned teams in our league are not really looking at the bottom line revenue-wise as much as they are player development. Yeah. And our independent owners are not as concerned about player development, and they're all about the bottom line. So, scheduling 3 games and 3 nights in a weekend for the independent owner is something they need to do because that's where the revenue is. For the NHL owner, they don't want their players playing 3 times in 72 hours.
Yep. And all of those issues are somewhat similar, and everybody understands that these are athletes we're dealing with, and they have agents and they have unions. What are, from your perspective, some of the common interests that you and the NHL share going forward?
Well, we have a common interest in growing the game, and I think to the extent that we are in 30 different markets than they are, then we are helping to grow the game for them in terms of the fan base for professional hockey. And also in terms of growing youth hockey across North America, our teams play a big role in that, as do the NHL teams. But the biggest single raison d'etre for us in terms of our partnership with the NHL is player development. Our players, 90% of the players today in the National Hockey League have come through the American League. That's a big number. I mean, if you look at any roster, almost every player, Pittsburgh, who won the Cup last year, only 2 players on their team hadn't come through the AHL. So the importance of player development for the NHL, particularly in a capped system where you have to have a fresh supply of young players who are talented and skilled in order to be able to work within a salary cap, we've become far more important kind of as part of the system of professional hockey than we were before.
Dave Andrews, where does hockey go internationally relative to not only you, but generally? World Cup, very successful, rotating basis, everybody seems to enjoy it, a lot of discussion about expanding across the pond, but a lot of it is probably just a little bit blue sky right now, but certainly awareness. It is an international game. So how do you assess all those equities?
That's an interesting question. I mean, the easy answer would be to say that there's a huge future for professional hockey to grow internationally. And then when you look at the sort of systemic challenges that we face doing that, I'm not sure how much of a focus the National Hockey League has had on really trying to think about expanding over the pond and growing the NHL itself, as much as I think Gary's vision is more developing the game globally as a game and as a sport, as opposed to necessarily seeing 5 franchises in Europe, for example. Or I think the growth of the game in China and the growth of the game in, it is a global game compared to some, not as global as perhaps basketball, but certainly pretty global in terms of Europe and all across that continent. So the game is doing well overseas. I think the growth of the KHL has shown that. So I'm not sure if there is a future structurally to say that the NHL needs to be in Europe or in China as a league, as much as growing the interest in the game is important for all of us.
Do you have a stake in the Olympic issue down the road? What would be your position, or do you just leave that to the NHL?
We leave it to the NHL, although we would, without a doubt, if the NHL did not participate, we would take a hit in terms of players leaving our league to go and play in the Olympic Games, because we're the next level of talent.
So there is a position. It is interesting.
Well, we would like them to go, but I understand the position that they're in, and when they go, it leaves a nice opening for us for a couple of weeks in North America, where we're the only pro hockey being played at that time. But still, there are a multitude of issues that are beyond my pay scale.
How are you doing as far as the complement of Gary's Sunbelt strategy? I mean, we know there are a lot of Sunbelt markets that are doing very, very well, and a lot of minor league markets that are doing well, and some not so well. Is it inherent with the geography? Is it the weather, or generally, where are you with that?
Well, it's a great question, because we just kind of jumped into the whole Sunbelt strategy. We moved 5 teams to California last year. We moved a team to Tucson this year. We have 2 teams down in Texas. The only place that we haven't kind of matched the NHL's expansion strategy has been in Florida. But we're doing really well in California. We're off to a good start in Tucson. I think the synergies between the NHL markets in California and ours are really strong in terms of growing the game and growing support for hockey. And attendance has been good. So we saw a jump last year in revenue in our league of about 16%, and that wasn't all through our brilliant marketing. It was a change of markets and moving from some weaker markets to some really strong ones. San Diego was terrific. Ontario, California has been really good. Bakersfield's been really good. As I said, Tucson's off to a good start. So we are matching up for sure.
And you're looking a lot healthier personally. You're working on that tan. You got Arizona, California. The frequent flyer miles are happening. It's perfect as a commissioner of a 30-team league, soon to be 31. Equity issues, expansion prices. How do you get new investors in the league?
We don't have a lot of inventory. It's difficult to attract new investors. We're having, as I mentioned, some NHL teams have purchased teams that were previously owned by independent owners. Our franchise values continue to go up and pricing continues to go up. Our first expansion in a long time will be probably in the next couple of months to match the NHL's expansion to 31 teams. We're ready to do that. We have a unique situation in terms of player supply, in that we match up 30 to 30. We're going to match up 31 to 31 because if we go beyond 31 teams, we don't have a player supply from an NHL club for that team. So it's kind of a there's not a lot of supply. There's a fair amount of demand for teams in our league, and that's a good position to be in.
I was just going to say, from a leverage position, you probably get taken to steak dinners as opposed to just McDonald's when you go into a town and meet with some owners. Yeah. And believe me, you deserved it. So, what about the kind of long-term growth? Are there certain areas that, assuming you could get over that unlimited supply issue, are there certain markets around the country that you're currently targeting as well, or North America?
I would say the trend with us has been to move teams closer to their NHL partners. And it hasn't been entirely market-driven. It's been seeking the synergies in terms of geographic proximity, and at the same time being far enough away that the NHL club is able to expand its fan base through its AHL club as well. So in terms of specific markets that we would be chasing, I think we would like to add another team on the West Coast as we move to 31. Ideally, we would strengthen ourselves there. We have 6 teams out there now. Having another would be helpful. But generally speaking, we're going to continue to be driven, I think, by the need for proximity to our NHL partners.
So Dave Andrews personally, so when I first met Dave Andrews, just truth be told, he was about 6'4", 220. Now he's about 5'4". All right, I won't do that. But after 23 years, what's next?
Well, I'm not sure. I think I'm getting towards the age of perhaps doing something different. This is, I said, is my 23rd year. Next year's 24th. I have a contract that sort of gives me the flexibility to step down when I see fit and continue on as chairman of the board beyond that. I think it depends a little bit on, I think it's probably very soon going to be time to pass it on to someone else to take the lead. It'll be better for the league in some ways, and having been in one job, I'd never been in one job for more than 5 years prior to this, and now I'm in 23 years in the same spot, which I certainly didn't see coming, but it's been wonderful, and I think I have to believe there's other things I can do in life that are going to be fun and interesting that'll be a little bit different, which probably one should have the courage to step out and go do.
Well, you have the courage to do it, but you do it in the context of the commissioner. Do you think you are the chief financial officer? Are you the general counsel? Are you the chief psychiatrist? I mean, what are the traits that you call on probably more than any in your 23 years of running this place?
Well, it's changed over the years. I think you learn to be all of those things, particularly you learn to be all of those things in this kind of a position because we don't have the resources to have a chief technical officer or a chief legal officer that's on board. So I'm involved in labor negotiations. I'm involved in marketing. I'm involved in all of our broadcasting. I'm involved in the actual game itself in terms of the integrity of competition and disciplinary action. You wear a lot of hats. In the beginning, you have a lot of learning to do, and over time you learn how to manage expectations. And I think you also need to be trusted. Once you build a certain trust level with all of your stakeholders, life gets an awful lot easier.
Well, certainly Dave Andrews has created a template for how to run a league, and it is interesting, ironic, and important and beneficial for the sport that the top 2 elected administrative officers of the top 2 leagues in hockey have stewarded their respective leagues for almost a quarter of a century and have that same kind of trust and confidence to run things very well. I really mean that. Thank you, Dave. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Rick. Much appreciated.